Reinhardt is Overwatch's most popular tank hero, but his playstyle is often misunderstood by the general player base. In this video, I'm going to give a Grandmaster's point of view on playing Rein correctly. Let's start with his primary fire. Reinhardt's hammer deals 85 damage every swing, affecting a 5-meter rectangle in front of him. Due to this hammer's hitbox, you can actually increase its effective range by positioning your opponent between your crosshair and the edge of your screen. This works because the distance from Reinhardt to the end of his hammer range is 5 meters, but the distance between Reinhardt and the corner of his hammer range is slightly longer. There's some unnecessary math behind this, but all you really need to know is that you should be looking to position your enemies right about here when swinging. Shaking your mouse from side to side actually achieves the same effect and is much easier to replicate, so doing this is actually the most effective way to attack those just out of range enemies. Reinhardt's primary fire is one of the few in Overwatch that you actually never want to stop using. Permanently holding down the fire button on Rein effectively creates a kill box in front of you that your enemies cannot step into. For example, if you're holding a corner like this and an enemy walks around it, you're going to quicker eliminate them by holding down swing and having this kill box preloaded. Let's build on that corner idea and talk a little bit about Reinhardt's general playstyle. Corners and natural cover are your best friend on Rein. His biggest weakness as a hero is getting himself into close enough range to deal damage. Being able to sit around a corner will create a kill box space that your enemies will have to walk into. This natural cover will also act as a damage blockage to help you preserve your health and shield resources, so you'll almost always want to be playing around some form of natural cover as Rein. This obviously works great on defending sides of maps, but it does work a little bit differently on attacking sides. Your goal when attacking on Rein is to mostly ignore the enemy tank, look for ways to secure eliminations on enemy squishies, and fall back to the safest corner once your health, shield, and cooldowns are running low. Your pin ability is your best friend when closing down enemies, since it's your only movement ability on Reinhardt. Another way you can close down the space is by shield hopping. Since holding shield naturally slows you down on Rein, shield hopping is the most effective way to make use of your shield health resources. This tech involves holding your shield up as you jump, mitigating 30% movement speed penalty, walking forward after you land, and repeating. This helps you to balance your health and shield resources, allowing you to use natural cover and your support heroes to restore them back to full health, before repeating this process. Moving forward and claiming map control is generally a good idea on Rein, but it's sometimes not a bad idea to take common flank routes and high grounds either. You leave your team vulnerable to dives and flanks when you're in hunt mode, so making sure these potential dive and flank threats are cleared out before you move away from your team is your best way of keeping your teammates alive. Those are the two primary focuses as a Reinhardt player. Firstly, claiming map control and allowing your team to take advantageous positions within a fight, and secondly, utilizing the space to secure eliminations as the ultimate punisher up close. The real skill to learn here for a solo queue Rein player is recognizing when you'll be punished for pushing into enemies and when you can push them freely. This is where you have to track things like enemy cooldowns and keep a good eye on your personal resources before committing into the enemy team, but we'll discuss these more later in the video. Before you're able to get close into the enemy team, Reinhardt's Fire Strike acts as a great tool to apply pressure to enemies and build ult charge. This Fire Strike does 100 damage, which is actually more than Rein's hammer damage. This makes Fire Strike a beneficial tool to use even up close to maximize your damage output. When swinging your hammer, you can actually throw a Fire Strike afterwards to cancel this animation to completely maximize your damage per second when up close on Rein. This swing and strike combo deals 185 damage, which kills Tracer, Widowmaker, and any DMech divas that get too close. Other quick combos include the double Fire Strike, which takes out every 200 HP hero except for Brig. You can, however, hit a swing, Fire Strike, and a second swing to take out Brig and any other hero up to Mei and Reaper at the 250 HP mark. If you were to use both Fire Strikes to cancel 2 swing animations, you can deal up to 370 damage in a hero's face, which will finish off Torbjorn, Bastion, and Rally Form Brig. Outside of comboing damage with Fire Strikes, you generally want to be throwing it towards squishy heroes to poke down their resource pool. Since it's a slow moving projectile, a good tip to surprise your opponents with this is to start the Fire Strike animation behind a piece of natural cover and quickly pop out to release it to give them less time to react. This tech also means that you're spending less time in the open, giving your opponents less time to fire shots into you. Let's keep on the theme of damage combos for just a second and talk about Rein's pin ability. This pin will deal 225 damage to anyone caught in it, and will also deal a separate 50 damage to anyone who can narrowly avoid it. This direct pin will eliminate any heroes with up to 225 health, with Symmetra being the highest HP target eliminated by this. Mei, Reaper, and Torb can all be eliminated by an additional hammer swing after the pin, but they do all have abilities to prevent this. Since Reinhardt is locked in an animation for longer than his enemy after pinning into a wall, this gives enough time for Cryo Freeze, Wraith Form, and Overload to be activated before Reinhardt can swing again. It's useful to know that you can eliminate these heroes if you pin them after they use their aforementioned abilities, but you shouldn't be expecting getting a kill on these heroes when pinning them. Alternatively, you can eliminate these heroes with a pin by sending them off the map with a pin cancel. Catching an enemy with pin, taking them to the edge of the map, and cancelling pin just before you fall off will cause them to fall to their doom. This is mainly used for catching the enemy tank, taking a massive part of the enemy team out of the game with a single cooldown. An extra tip for this is to hit the enemy with a hammer swing just before they fall, since your hammer provides a short knockback that will help to confirm that they don't stay on the map. It may take a little bit of practice to begin nailing this skill, but it is a skill totally worth thinking about where the opportunity presents itself. The main objective for Rein's pin though is to actually get closer to enemies and take map control. This is Reinhardt's only mitigation when it comes to getting close to enemies, so it's important to use it to get up in your enemy's face to stop you from being a glorified shield bot. The more you use this ability, the more you'll learn when is and isn't a good time to pin. This is likely the hardest ability for new Rein players to pick up, so it's important to use it often so you quickly learn what you can and cannot do with this ability. For example, you'll quickly learn how important enemy positioning is when pinning into the opponent team. Pinning into 5 enemies with no real game plan of eliminating anybody or escaping isn't the best idea. Also, you'll quickly learn about all the different cooldowns you have to look out for when pinning. If you're pinning in to secure an elimination as part of your game plan, be careful that there isn't an enemy Ana waiting around the corner with a sleep dart to put you in real danger. A cool trick you can do to prevent this is pin cancelling into a shield. Pinning in, hitting cancel, then blocking the enemy cooldown with a shield is a great way to waste the enemy's cooldowns and set up for larger plays. Another great play you can make with pin is to cancel enemy ultimates. Pinning an enemy technically acts as a stun, so pinning something like Cassidy's High Noon is a great trade to make, especially as Cassidy takes quite a long time to charge up enough damage to kill you. This also works for Reaper's Death Blossom and Moira's Coalescence, so you should always be ready to attempt an ultimate cancel with pin if you know an opponent has their ultimate ready. In the case of pinning Moira and Cassidy, you will actually eliminate these heroes on top of cancelling their ultimate. This pinning and killing whilst in ultimate strategy also applies to Genji's Dragon Blade, Sojourn's Overclock, and Soldier's Visor, alongside Cassidy and Moira. Some of these ultimates can be difficult to pin, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't try anyway. Even missing the pin and just being a general threat to the ulting player can be a valuable distraction that keeps your teammates alive. Just being up in their face and swinging a few hammers can be enough of a deterrent to ruin the enemy's ultimate. The final group of ults you should be looking to pin are the positional ultimates. These are any ultimates that you can't necessarily cancel or kill by using pin, but you should be looking to disrupt the position of if the opportunity presents itself. This strategy applies to Doomfist Meteor Strike, Ramattra's Annihilation, Ashe's Bob, Ana's Nano Boost, Briggs Rally, and Zen's Transcendence. Again, you don't always have to pin into these ults, but if the opportunity presents itself, it's always a good idea to disrupt their positioning and gain value for your team. Moving on to the largest part of Reinhardt's kit, let's talk about his shield. Shield is a super misunderstood ability by a lot of players. As Reinhardt, you're always more effective when swinging than you are when shielding, and when to use your shield comes down to 3 key circumstances. The first of these is to use your shield as a resource to protect yourself. This shield practically acts as a 1200 HP resource that you should be using as part of your effective health pool. This is where the shield hopping technique really excels, as it allows you to block incoming damage whilst your supports restore your health bar without becoming a total shield bot. If your health bar gets too low, you can actually do the shield hopping technique to reposition your shield between you and the enemy. If an enemy is in your face, backward shield hopping will generate enough distance for you to block damage with your shield, and you can repeat this anytime anyone re-enters your safe zone. Rein's shield helps him to preserve some of his actual health bar, but can also be a great counter to enemy cooldowns, which is the second reason for using your shield. Quickly flashing up your shield after you hear an enemy fire a cooldown at you can provide great value, taking the enemy's cooldown out of play for relatively little cost on your part. For this reason, it's important to keep a few hit points available on Reinhardt's shield where possible rather than letting it break. This is because Rein's shield gets put on a 5-second cooldown after breaking, leaving you completely vulnerable to enemy cooldowns. It also doesn't recharge any quicker after being broken. Rein's shield recharges at a rate of 144 health per second after the first 2 seconds of being dropped. Whether you leave your shield down for 5 seconds or whether you have your shield broken, it will always regen a consistent 432 health over that 5-second period. The main cooldowns you want to look to block are forms of CC. Sigma's Rock is a prime example, as it plays an audible cue before a lengthy animation that gives you enough time to pop your shield and block. Some other easy examples are things like Doomfist Seismic Slam, Ashe's Dynamite, Echo Sticky Bombs, and Ana's Biotic Nade. Of course, blocking anything with shield is typically a good idea, but cooldowns like Orisa's Javelin or Ana's Sleep Dart are a lot more difficult, so they're not as consistent to react to. On the topic of blocking cooldowns, you can also block a lot of ultimates with Reinhardt's shield. These include Doomfist Meteor Strike, Diva's Self-Destruct, Ramatra's Annihilation, Reinhardt's Earth Shatter, Zarya's Graviton Surge, Bastion's Artillery, Cassidy's Deadeye, Junkrat's Riptire, Reaper's Death Blossom, Sojourn's Overclock, Soldier's Tactical Visor, Torbjorn's Molten Core, and Tracer's Pulse Bomb. You can also block the effects of Lucio's Sound Barrier and Zenyatta's Transcendent, but these are a little more difficult to do, so definitely not a priority. Blocking any hero's ultimate with your shield provides immense value for your team, so it's always important to keep these ultimates at the front of your mind so you can help your team by countering them. The third reason you want to use your shield will be to maintain positioning and map control. This more generally will mean to block damage to buy more time for your supports to heal you up when you're low, but there are more complex reasons you'd want to hold shield to maintain space as well. My favorite example of this is zoning out opponent resources when your team is being dived by an enemy. If you're able to use your shield to isolate a diver off from their team's resources, there's a very high chance that your team can win the 4v1 and can return to the larger team fight with a player advantage. Doing this is a lot more effective than peeling back for your team. Since your team will likely fend off the flanker by themselves, it's important for you as a tank player to not give up the space by peeling backwards. Now let's talk about Reinhardt's ultimate, Earth Shatter. Shatter will stun enemies ahead of you for 2.75 seconds and apply 50 damage to all enemies affected. Shatter will actually apply 170 damage to any enemies within 1.75 meters of the cast, allowing you to eliminate any baby divas and tracers should they be stood directly on top of you. The most efficient way to eliminate enemies after shattering is to use the swing animation cancel into a fire strike. This will deal 235 damage total, taking out every DPS and support hero besides Bastion. Since this combo takes out almost every hero you would want to shatter, it's usually a better option than hitting the pin button after your ult. Pin can be useful if the hero you're targeting is getting pocketed, for example, but your default reaction to hitting a big slam should be, okay, how can I most effectively eliminate the heroes on the ground? And the answer is usually with a swing or fire strike. One of the better times you would actually want to pin after hitting a shatter is if you're targeting the enemy tank. If you hit the 170 damage on a shatter, then a swing and a fire strike, then pin into the enemy tank, you're actually able to kill Doomfist, Junker Queens, Omnic Form Archers, Sigmas, and Zaryas. Other than that, it's almost always more effective to swing or fire strike enemies who you hit with Shatter. Outside of these damage numbers, Shatter's general stun is probably one of its greatest strengths. This stun can allow you to counter a few enemy ultimates, which automatically results in a pretty good trade off the bat. These examples are practically the same ultimates that you want to be cancelling with Pin, but for a refresher, these are things like Cassidy's Deadeye, Reaper's Death Blossom, and Moira's Coalescence. On top of these ults that you can completely cancel, Shatter is also great at buying time for your team, even if it doesn't stun the opponent out of their ult against quite a few of the enemy ultimates. Some great examples of this are Ramatra's Annihilation, Sojourn's Overclock, Soldier's Tactical Visor, Torbjorn's Molten Core, Anna's Nano Boost, Baptiste's Amplification Matrix, and Kiriko's Kitsune Rush. Remember, you won't actually cancel any of these ultimates by stunning them with Shatter, but hitting the enemies that are utilizing any of these ults will help your team to survive against these ults. In general, Reinhardt's ultimate isn't actually that good. It's relatively easy to track when he has it and to just position outside of its area of effect. Additionally, there are a ton of cooldowns that can counter it too. As the Reinhardt player, you shouldn't worry about hitting the perfect Shatter. Your general mindset should be focused on whether or not your opponents are currently able to cancel or avoid your Shatter. For example, if an enemy Kiriko just used a Suzu in front of you, great. Get ready to shatter the next available opponent and quickly confirm that kill, since the enemy counter is now on cooldown. The most infamous counters to Rein's Shatter are enemy shields, so here's a quick rundown of how to play against every shield tank in Overwatch. For Ramatra and Winston's shields, you can just wait for these to expire before using Shatter, so they're actually not that big a problem for Reinhardt. Against a Sigma, you can either wait for him to pull his shield back, or you can simply walk past it. However, if you shatter the enemy team when behind a Sigma shield, your own team are unlikely to be able to assist you with any healing or damage due to the Sigma shield blocking them off, so it's generally just better to wait until he doesn't have his shield available. In this specific matchup, it's typically best to shatter a Sigma when he's using Kinetic Grasp. This is because the Sigma is likely already on low health if he's using Grasp, and he's unable to use his shield with this cooldown active. This makes Shatter a guaranteed hit, cancelling his cooldown, and making him an easy kill if he was already low health. This tip also works against Ramatra's Nemesis form, since he can't use his shield with his cooldown active, so can work well for hitting Shatters against Ramatra. Against an enemy Reinhardt player, hitting your Shatter against his shield is typically a mind game. The best strategy here is to play aggressively and get up into his face, minimizing the time the Shatter takes to reach the enemy Rein, and giving you a better opportunity to use your ultimate. In general, you don't have much reason to shatter tanks, and will obtain much more value from hitting their teammates instead. However, if an enemy tank is playing grouped up with their team, using these strategies to shatter around their shield cooldowns can help you with destroying the rest of the team as well. Next, let's talk a bit about Reinhardt's tank matchups. Overall, Rein has pretty neutral matchups with a lot lot of the tanks in Overwatch, so he's generally not a bad pick in most situations. Rein is a great punisher up close, but he does lack the dynamic cooldowns that some of the other tanks possess. Therefore, his best matchups come against tanks that he's able to swing on up close, without getting destroyed by enemy cooldowns. The absolute best example for this would be against Zarya. While Zarya also does want to play at close range, Reinhardt simply has too many resources to make this a good idea for Zarya. Rein can very simply hold the swing key on Zarya, and can choose to block with shield and stop swinging whenever she activates a bubble. This prevents the Zarya player from building charge and resumes the fight in Reinhardt's favour. This up close threat prevents the Zarya player from walking through your teammates, giving Rein the ultimate edge when pushing forward in this matchup. The real struggle on Reinhardt is winning his less favourable matchups. These come against heroes that have abilities that are difficult for Rein to fight into. Orisa, Ramatra and Roadhog are great examples of these. The hardest one there is definitely Orisa in my opinion. Her cooldowns act as great counters to Rein as a hero, and she's able to chase you around the map relatively well to counter you. The best thing you're able to do here is to accept the counter and ignore the horse as much as possible. Wrecking Ball is another tank that can also give you problems and you just need to ignore. He's going to permanently attack your backline, so your best play is to attack his back. Whichever tank can confirm the backline eliminations first will win the fight, so this is your best bet of beating him. Against Roadhog, he's actually one of the only heroes that can beat you in a 1v1 close up. Your best play here is to bait out his hook and pin into his breather as much as possible. When Hog has no cooldowns, this is when he's most vulnerable, and you're now free to swing at him to confirm the elimination. Ramatra is probably the easiest of Reinhardt's bad matchups in my opinion. If you play aggressively and take him on in a close range 1v1, you will come out on top as long as your team supports you. The counter comes when your team don't support your engagement, and the Ramatra is free to punch through your shield to take you out. If this happens, you want to try to avoid being low health when the Ramatra's Nemesis form is available, and get more aggressive when he's back in Omnic form. He has to be in this Omnic form for at least 8 seconds, and he's almost a free elimination if you can work your way into hammer swinging range whilst he's in this form. The best way to play around counters in Overwatch 2 is by having a wide range of heroes that you're able to swap to. Sigma is a great backup option to Reinhardt since he plays well into Orisa, Wrecking Ball, and Roadhog. So if you're interested in picking up and learning Sigma, you can check out my Sigma guide video on the left side of your screen now.